They say that on the night Luna first appeared, every music box in Millhaven played the same forgotten lullaby at exactly 3 minutes past midnight, their tiny dancers spinning in perfect synchronization, though their springs had been silent for decades. The melody drifted through open windows and under doorways, weaving itself into dreams already half-formed, leaving behind a strange comfort that lingered until dawn. Some claimed it was the wind playing tricks with old mechanisms, but those who listened closely knew better. It was an announcement, gentle as a whisper, that something extraordinary had quietly taken root in their ordinary world. Before we venture deeper into this tale, let me pause to tell you something that comes from the very center of our hearts. We truly love you, and we care about you more than words can properly express. Your presence here in this moment, sharing this quiet space with us, means everything. Whatever brought you to this story tonight, whether it's been a day of joy or struggle, whether you're seeking comfort or simply a peaceful transition into sleep, know that you are welcomed here with complete tenderness. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. Luna was discovered at sunrise in the town's old music shop, curled like a question mark between the piano bench and a cello case that hadn't been opened in years. Mrs. Harmony, the shop's keeper, found her there when she arrived to tune the ancient upright piano, a ritual she performed every Tuesday morning, more from habit than necessity, since few customers ventured into her dusty sanctuary anymore. The child couldn't have been more than 7, with hair the color of moonbeams caught in spider silk and eyes that held depths usually reserved for much older souls. She wasn't crying, wasn't calling for help or explanations. Instead, she sat with her small hands pressed against the cello case, humming a melody that seemed to make the very air shimmer with possibility. When Miss Harmony knelt beside her, Luna looked up with a smile so genuine it felt like being handed a gift. "You didn't know you'd been waiting for. The music told me to wait here," she said simply, as if this explanation covered everything important about her presence. Mrs. Harmony, who had spent 60 years listening to the voices hidden inside instruments, understood immediately that some truths require no further questioning. In the days that followed, Luna's peculiar gift began to reveal itself in the gentlest possible ways. She could hear music that others couldn't. Not imaginary melodies, but the songs that lived secretly inside everyday things. The coffee percolator in Mrs. Harmony's back room hummed a waltz in B-flat minor. The old cash register chimed out fragments of half-remembered lullabies. Even the creaking floorboards seemed to carry rhythm and harmony when Luna walked across them, her footsteps unconsciously keeping time with their wooden whispers. More remarkable still was her ability to coax these hidden songs into the open. When she placed her hands on the dusty violin cases, their instruments would begin to resonate softly, producing notes so pure they seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to the heart. Customers who hadn't planned to buy anything would find themselves drawn to particular instruments, discovering melodies they'd been carrying inside themselves without knowing. A businessman purchased a harmonica and spent his lunch breaks playing tunes that reminded him of his grandfather's farm. A young mother bought a small drum for her toddler and found that its gentle rhythms could soothe even the most stubborn tears. Luna never forced these musical awakenings. She simply listened, with the kind of attention that makes space for magic to unfold naturally. When someone entered the shop carrying sadness like a heavy coat, she might hum a few bars of something wordless while organizing sheet music, and gradually the visitor's shoulders would relax. If a child seemed restless or overwhelmed, Luna would tap out a simple rhythm on the counter, and soon small feet would be moving in time, transforming anxiety into gentle motion. Mrs. Harmony watched these quiet miracles with wonder that never dulled into familiarity. Luna had brought something back to the shop that had been slowly fading, not just customers but the sense that music was alive, that it existed not merely in performance but in the spaces between notes, in the silence that gives meaning to sound. The old woman began to understand that Luna hadn't simply appeared in her shop. She had awakened something that had always been there, waiting patiently for the right kind of listening. As autumn painted the town in shades of amber and rust, Luna's presence had woven itself so naturally into the fabric of daily life that it seemed impossible to remember how things had been before. She helped Mrs. Harmony with simple tasks, polishing brass fittings, organizing music stands, greeting customers with her luminous smile, but her real contribution was harder to define. She had become a kind of tuning fork for the human heart, helping people find their own natural frequency. The townspeople began to speak of the music shop differently. Children would ask their parents if they could visit the place where songs live. Adults would stop by, not necessarily to purchase anything, but to spend a few minutes in an atmosphere that seemed to remember what peace felt like. Even the town's stray cats gathered on the shop's front step each evening, purring in harmony as the day's last light faded into purple dusk. Luna never spoke of where she had come from or how she had learned to hear the world's secret music. When asked, she would tilt her head thoughtfully and say, "I think I've always been listening," as if her entire existence had been one long, patient attention to the melodies hiding in plain sight. Mrs. Harmony learned not to press for explanations, understanding that some gifts arrive without instruction manuals, requiring only acceptance and gratitude. On quiet evenings, after the shop had closed and the street lamps began their gentle glow, Luna would sit at the old piano and play melodies that seemed to emerge from the instrument itself rather than from her small fingers. These weren't songs from any book or tradition, but something more fundamental, the music of contentment, of belonging, of home. Mrs. Harmony would listen from her chair by the window, feeling her own heart settle into rhythm with the gentle cadences, and know that whatever mysterious forces had brought Luna to her shop, they had been motivated by the deepest kind of love. The weeks that followed Luna's arrival settled into a rhythm as gentle and predictable as breathing. Winter wrapped itself around Millhaven like a soft blanket, and the music shop became a refuge where the season's hush felt less like silence and more like the pause between movements in a symphony. Luna had grown into her role as Mrs. Harmony's quiet companion, moving through the shop with the careful grace of someone who understood that every surface held a song waiting to be discovered. Mrs. Harmony noticed that Luna's gift was deepening in ways that surprised them both. Where once the child had heard only the music hidden in objects, she now seemed to perceive something more intimate. The melodies that lived inside people themselves. It began subtly, with Luna tilting her head when customers spoke, as if listening to harmonies that accompanied their words. Sometimes she would nod thoughtfully, or her eyes would widen with gentle wonder, and Mrs. Harmony began to understand that Luna was hearing the soundtrack of human hearts. The first time Luna mentioned this new ability, she was helping sort through donated sheet music when she paused, holding a handwritten composition with reverent fingers. "The person who wrote this," she said softly, "their song is still playing somewhere. It sounds like morning light on water." Mrs. Harmony felt a small shiver of recognition, though she couldn't say why the description seemed so perfectly true. It was during these quiet winter days that Silas began appearing in their lives with the regularity of a welcomed season. He delivered fresh bread from the town bakery, arriving each Tuesday and Friday with warm loaves wrapped in clean cloth, and the scent of yeast and hope clinging to his coat. Silas was perhaps 20, with hands that knew the patient work of kneading and eyes that carried a sadness he wore like a familiar sweater, comfortable in its weight, but never quite warm. Luna seemed to recognize something in Silas from their first meeting. She would watch him quietly as he arranged the bread on Mrs. Harmony's counter, her head tilted in that particular way that meant she was listening to music only she could hear. Silas, for his part, began to linger just slightly longer than necessary, not speaking much but seeming to find something peaceful in Luna's gentle attention. One grey afternoon, when snow tapped against the windows like patient fingers, Silas arrived, looking more burdened than usual. His shoulders curved inward, as if protecting something fragile, and his usual quiet greeting came out barely above a whisper. Luna appeared beside him with the silent grace she had perfected, not speaking but simply being present in that special way she had learned. After a moment she walked to the old upright piano and began to play, not one of her spontaneous melodies, but something that sounded ancient and comforting, like a lullaby that had been passed down through generations of gentle hands. The music filled the small space between them, and Silas stood very still, listening with an intensity that made Mrs. Harmony hold her breath. "My grandmother used to hum something like that," Silas said finally, his voice thick with memory. "When I was small, and the world felt too big." Luna's fingers never paused, but she smiled with the kind of understanding that needs no explanation. "She still does," Luna replied with quiet certainty. "Her song lives in you. Would you like to learn to hear it?" What followed was one of the most beautiful hours Mrs. Harmony had ever witnessed. Luna, with infinite patience, helped Silas rediscover the melody his grandmother's love had planted in his heart years before. She showed him how to listen for it in the rhythm of his own breathing, in the steady beat of kneading dough, in the quiet moments between one task and another. By the time he left that afternoon, Silas was humming softly to himself, and his footsteps carried a lightness that hadn't been there in months. The transformation in their small corner of Millhaven continued to unfold with the gentle persistence of spring growth beneath winter snow. People began visiting the music shop not just for instruments but for something harder to name, a kind of musical counseling that happened without appointment or explanation. Luna never advertised her gift or claimed to heal anyone. She simply listened with the kind of attention that made space for magic to unfold naturally. Mrs. Harmony watched these quiet miracles with a mixture of pride and protective wonder. She began to understand that Luna hadn't simply appeared in her shop by chance. The child was something rarer and more precious, a living reminder that the world still held mystery, that kindness could take forms beyond ordinary comprehension, and that sometimes the most profound healing happened not through grand gestures but through the simple act of being truly heard. On the coldest evening yet, as they prepared to close the shop, the silver music box began to play by itself once again. The time was exactly 3 minutes past 9, and the melody was the same haunting tune that had first announced Luna's presence in their lives. Luna placed her hand gently on the box's lid, not to stop it, but to greet it like an old friend returning from a long journey. "It keeps time with something we can't see," she said thoughtfully, watching snowflakes dance past the window, like a clock that measures feelings instead of hours. Mrs. Harmony nodded, understanding that some truths were too delicate for explanation, requiring only acceptance and gratitude. As they climbed the stairs to their small apartment above the shop, Mrs. Harmony found herself humming Luna's first melody, the one she had been singing that morning they met. It had become the soundtrack to her contentment, a gentle reminder that the most extraordinary gifts often arrive disguised as the most ordinary moments. Outside, Millhaven settled into sleep under its blanket of snow, and throughout the town people drifted off to dreams filled with melodies they were only beginning to remember how to hear. The winter nights grew longer, but somehow the darkness felt less empty, filled as it was with the quiet promise that spring would come, bringing with it new songs they had yet to learn to sing together. Spring arrived in Millhaven like a gentle awakening, the kind that happens slowly and then all at once, transforming the familiar landscape with soft touches of green and the tentative songs of returning birds. The music shop seemed to breathe differently in the warming air, its windows open to let in the sweet scent of thawing earth and the distant sound of water running free from winter's grip. Luna had grown taller through the cold months, but more than that, she had grown deeper into her gift, learning to listen not just to the music hidden in things, but to the melodies that lived within people's hearts. Silas continued his faithful visits, but the young man who arrived each Tuesday and Friday was transformed from the one who had first stepped through their door. The weight that had once curved his shoulders inward had lifted, replaced by something approaching lightness. He moved through the shop with a quiet confidence, arranging his bread with hands that seemed to remember rhythm in every gesture. Mrs. Harmony noticed how he hummed now as he worked, unconsciously weaving his grandmother's rediscovered lullaby into the simple act of sharing food. Luna had given him back more than a melody. She had returned to him the knowledge that love, once planted in the heart, never truly disappears, but waits patiently to be remembered. The silver music box had continued its mysterious habit of choosing its own moments to play, though Luna was beginning to understand the pattern beneath its apparent randomness. It wasn't marking time in any conventional sense, but something more subtle. Moments when someone in their small corner of the world was ready to receive exactly what they needed to hear. Sometimes it played at 3 minutes past noon, when the afternoon light fell just so across a customer browsing sheet music. Other times it chose 3 minutes past evening, when the day's last visitor needed a moment of unexpected beauty to carry them home. Luna's ability to perceive the music within people had deepened as well, developing layers she was only beginning to explore. Where once she had heard simple melodies, she now detected harmonies and counterpoints, the complex orchestrations of human experience. Some people carried bright, quick songs that sparkled like sunlight on water. Others held deeper compositions, rich with the accumulated wisdom of years lived fully. And then there were those whose inner music had become tangled, beautiful themes obscured by discord or doubt. It was during one of these peaceful spring mornings that Luna encountered someone whose song would teach her something entirely new about the nature of healing. The woman entered the shop quietly, moving with the careful grace of someone who had learned to carry fragile things. She introduced herself simply as Elena, and when she spoke, her voice held the slight tremor of someone who had recently discovered that the world could change without warning. Elena's inner music was unlike anything Luna had heard before, not chaotic exactly, but fragmented, as if a beautiful symphony had been scattered by wind and the pieces were struggling to remember how they fit together. She browsed the instruments with reverent fingers, pausing longest at a small wooden flute that seemed to call to something deep within her memory. Luna approached with the gentle patience she had learned from Mrs. Harmony, not offering solutions but simply making space for whatever wanted to emerge. Elena picked up the flute with hands that remembered its weight, though she seemed surprised by her own certainty. When she brought it to her lips, the first sounds were hesitant, breathy whispers more than music, but gradually, tentatively, a single clear note emerged, trembling but true. Luna listened with her whole being, hearing not just the flute's voice but the story it was telling, of music lessons in childhood, of dreams set aside for practical concerns, of a recent loss that had left Elena searching for something she couldn't name. Without conscious thought, Luna moved to the small drum that sat near the window and began tapping the gentlest rhythm, a heartbeat suggestion that offered support without overwhelming the delicate melody Elena was coaxing from her instrument. For several minutes they played together, Elena's flute finding confidence in Luna's steady accompaniment. The music they created wasn't complex or showy, but it held something precious, the sound of a soul remembering its own voice after a long silence. When they finally let the last notes fade into the shop's welcoming quiet, Elena's eyes held a brightness that hadn't been there when she arrived. "I used to play," Elena said softly, cradling the flute as if it were made of spun glass. "Before life got so busy, before I convinced myself that music was a luxury I couldn't afford." She looked at Luna with something approaching wonder. "I'd forgotten how it felt to make something beautiful, just for the joy of it." Luna smiled with the understanding that needed no words. "Music remembers us even when we forget it," she said gently. "It waits for us to come back, like a friend who never gives up hope." Elena purchased the flute that day, but more importantly, she left carrying something she had thought was lost forever. The knowledge that it was never too late to reclaim the parts of herself that brought joy. Mrs. Harmony watched the transaction with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a small miracle. disguised as an ordinary Tuesday morning. That evening, as they prepared to close the shop, the music box opened at 7:03, its tiny dancer spinning in the golden light that slanted through the windows. Luna placed her hand gently on its lid, not to stop the melody, but to thank it for its perfect timing. She was beginning to understand that her gift wasn't really about hearing hidden music at all, but about helping people remember that they had always been musicians in the symphony of their own lives. Silas arrived just as they were turning the sign, carrying not just bread, but a small bouquet of early wildflowers he had noticed blooming along his route. "For the shop," he said simply, but his smile was for Luna, a wordless acknowledgement of all the ways she had helped him remember his own song. As Mrs. Harmony arranged the flowers in a mason jar, their simple beauty seemed to add another voice to the shop's gentle chorus. Outside, Millhaven settled into evening with the contentment of a town that had learned to listen to its own rhythm. In the music shop, surrounded by instruments that held the potential for countless melodies yet to be discovered, Luna felt the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. She was learning that the most profound healing often happened not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of helping someone remember that they had never stopped being capable of creating beauty. The night air carried the promise of warmer days ahead, and with it the certainty that more people would find their way to the shop, drawn by needs they might not even recognize until they stepped inside and heard Hest for the first time in years, the sound of their own hearts singing. The weeks following Elena's rediscovery brought a subtle transformation to the rhythm of life around the music shop. Summer settled over Millhaven with the gentle persistence of a favorite song, and people began arriving not just as customers but as pilgrims seeking something they couldn't quite name. Word had spread through town in the quiet way that meaningful things do, not through deliberate announcement, but through the soft testimonies of changed hearts. Elena had become a Thursday evening fixture, arriving with her wooden flute wrapped in the same linen scarf, her confidence growing like morning light across water. She no longer needed Luna's gentle accompaniment. The rhythm lived securely in her breath now, and her melodies had begun to carry the distinctive voice of someone who had remembered how to trust her own creative instincts. Mrs. Harmony would listen from behind the counter, polishing brass fittings with the quiet satisfaction of someone witnessing a small miracle unfold in weekly installments. Silas continued his faithful bread deliveries, but his visits had evolved into something richer than simple commerce. He arrived earlier now, staying longer, often helping Mrs. Harmony arrange displays or simply sitting by the window with his characteristic quiet presence. His grandmother's lullaby had woven itself so thoroughly into his daily rhythm that he hummed it unconsciously while working, the melody floating around him like a gentle benediction. Luna noticed how his inner music had brightened, the heavy undertones of loneliness replaced by something approaching contentment. It was during one of these peaceful summer afternoons that the shop's bell announced an unexpected visitor. The man who entered moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working with delicate things, his weathered hands bearing the subtle calluses of decades spent in meticulous craft. He introduced himself simply as Mr. Oakes, explaining that he kept the clock shop across the street and had been meaning to visit for months. Luna felt his inner song immediately, complex and layered, built on foundations of patience and precision, but carrying a thin, persistent note that seemed to hover at the edges of his consciousness like an unwelcome guest. Mr. Oakes browsed the instruments with respectful attention, pausing longest at the brass metronome, whose steady pendulum seemed to speak to something deep in his clockmaker's soul. "Curious thing, that music box of yours," he said quietly, watching the silver mechanism rest silently on its shelf. "Winds down yet keeps its own appointments. Most devices insist on being told when that one seems to know already." His voice carried the slight strain of someone who had learned to speak over an internal distraction, and Luna recognized the particular quality of attention that comes from living with persistent sound. She approached him with the gentle patience Mrs. Harmony had taught her, not offering solutions but simply making space for whatever wanted to emerge. Sometimes the hardest sounds to live with are the ones that don't belong to anything we can see, she said softly, her words carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned to listen beneath the surface of things. Mr. Oakes looked at her with surprise, then something approaching relief. A thin, high note, he admitted, touching his ear briefly. Been there for months now, harder to ignore when the clocks are quiet. He smiled apologetically. Funny thing for a clockmaker, missing silence. Luna closed her eyes and tilted her head, listening not to the unwelcome sound, but to him, to the patient way he carried himself despite the constant intrusion. She moved to the small collection of chimes near the window, selecting the most delicate bell, one whose note was more suggestion than sound. She let it ring once, soft and clear, then began to breathe in time with its fading resonance. Not to drown it, she explained gently, but to give it company. She rang the bell again, establishing a rhythm that honored both the sound he couldn't escape and the peace he was seeking. Mr. Oakes found himself following her pace instinctively, his shoulders relaxing with each measured breath, the tight concentration in his jaw gradually easing. The high note didn't disappear, it rarely does, but it moved to a different place in his awareness, accepting a gentler role in the arrangement of his attention. Mrs. Harmony watched from the counter, understanding that this was how so much of the world's real healing happened. Not through dramatic cures, but through the subtle shifting of weight from one side of the heart to another. Elena paused in her practice to witness this quiet exchange, recognizing in it something of her own journey back to music. There was no grand gesture, no miraculous transformation, only the patient work of learning to live more peacefully with what couldn't be changed while nurturing what could be. Mr. Oakes returned the following day with a small wrapped parcel, revealing a set of tiny brass tools worn smooth by years of careful use. If the music box should ever want a kinder touch, he said, sometimes the smallest adjustment makes all the difference. He worked with reverent precision, adding only the thinnest cushion beneath one small wheel, and when he closed the lid, the dancer's feet whispered against the platform instead of clicking. The change was barely perceptible, yet it transformed the entire melody, bringing it somehow closer to the skin, more intimate in its delivery. Luna understood that this was Mr. Oakes's way of saying thank you, offering his own gift of precision and care to something that had brought him comfort. As if responding to this act of gentle collaboration, the silver music box chose that moment to open, its tiny dancer spinning as the familiar melody filled the shop at exactly 3 minutes past 4. Mr. Oakes, Elena, and Silas, who had arrived with the afternoon bread, all stood listening with the reverence of people who had learned to recognize magic when it appeared. The music seemed to weave their individual stories together. Elena's rediscovered joy, Silas's quiet contentment, Mr. Oakes's patient resilience, and Luna's growing understanding of her role as a gentle conductor in the symphony of human healing. Mrs. Harmony moved among them, straightening sheet music and polishing instruments, content to let the afternoon unfold at its own peaceful pace. When the melody faded, the shop felt freshly arranged in some subtle way, as if invisible threads had been rewoven into a stronger, more beautiful pattern. Outside, Millhaven continued its summer drowse, but inside the music shop, 4 people had discovered once again that the most profound connections often happen not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of listening, really listening, to the quiet songs that live within us all. As evening approached and the golden light slanted through the windows, Luna felt the deep satisfaction that came from watching people find exactly what they needed, even when they hadn't known they were searching for it. The day's death, Mr. Oakes's gentle adjustment to the music box settled into a rhythm as natural as breathing, each morning arriving with the soft promise of connection renewed. Summer had deepened around Millhaven like a familiar embrace, and the music shop had become something more than Mrs. Harmony had ever imagined, not just a place where instruments waited to be discovered, but a living heart that seemed to pulse with the quiet contentment of a community learning to listen to itself. Luna moved through these golden afternoons with a growing awareness that her gift was changing again, expanding in ways that both thrilled and humbled her. Where once she had heard individual songs within people, she now perceived something larger. The way Elena's Thursday evening flute practice seemed to harmonize with Silas's unconscious humming as he walked his morning routes. How Mr. Oakes's careful breathing had found synchronization with the gentle rhythm of Mrs. Chen's knitting needles clicking on her front porch 3 blocks away. The entire town was learning to sing together, creating an invisible symphony that flowed through streets and windows like a river of shared melody. This discovery brought with it a new kind of visitor to their door, people who arrived looking slightly bewildered by their own presence, drawn by something they felt but couldn't name. They would browse the instruments with the hesitant movements of sleepwalkers following a dream they couldn't quite recall, their inner songs calling to the growing harmony that surrounded them. One such visitor was Margaret, a woman in her 60s who taught literature at the elementary school and carried herself with the careful dignity of someone who had spent decades nurturing other people's children while quietly setting aside her own creative dreams. She entered on a Wednesday morning when the light fell just so across the sheet music display, her silver hair catching the same golden threads that danced through the dust motes. Luna felt Margaret's inner music immediately, not absent but carefully contained, like a garden that had been lovingly tended but never allowed to bloom beyond its prescribed borders. Her song was there, patient and beautiful, filled with the accumulated wisdom of countless stories read aloud and the gentle authority of someone who understood the power of words to heal and transform. Margaret gravitated toward the small collection of hand drums near the window, running her fingers along their stretched surfaces with the reverence of someone encountering a language they had always wanted to learn. "I used to write poetry," she admitted quietly, as if confessing to a secret indulgence. "When I was young, before I understood that teaching others to love words was more important than making my own." Luna approached with the gentle patience that had become her signature, not offering immediate solutions but simply creating space for whatever wanted to emerge. "Words and rhythms live in the same place," she said softly, settling beside Margaret with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned that healing often required the simple act of sitting together in possibility. "Maybe your poems are still there, just waiting for a different kind of voice." She showed Margaret how to hold the drum, how to listen for the heartbeat that lived within its circular frame. Margaret's first attempts were tentative, her fingers searching for rhythms that matched the internal cadences of half-remembered verses, but gradually, tentatively, patterns began to emerge, not complex beats, but something more fundamental, the pulse that underlies all language, all meaning, all connection. Without conscious thought, Luna began to hum softly, not overwhelming Margaret's tentative rhythm, but supporting it, giving it a foundation that allowed her confidence to grow. What emerged wasn't polished or perfect, but it held something more valuable, the sound of creativity remembering its own permission to exist. As the afternoon progressed, Margaret's drumming gained strength and certainty. Her educator's mind began to recognize the patterns Luna had mentioned, finding in the structure of rhythm and repetition the same elegant logic that governed her beloved poetry. But more than that, she began to remember the joy she had felt as a young woman when her pen first discovered it could create something beautiful from nothing but intention and attention. Mrs. Harmony watched this quiet transformation with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed countless small miracles but never lost her capacity for wonder. She understood that Margaret represented something important in Luna's growing ability to heal not just individuals but the spaces between them. The recognition that creativity wasn't separate from service but woven into its very foundation. When Margaret finally lifted her hands from the drum, the shop held the particular silence that follows meaningful music, not empty, but full of resonance and possibility. "I'd forgotten," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion she hadn't expected to feel. "I'd forgotten that making something beautiful could feel like coming home to myself." Luna smiled with the understanding that needed no words. "Your poems never left," she said gently. "They were just waiting for you to remember that you deserve to hear them again." As evening approached and the golden light slanted through the windows in familiar patterns, the silver music box chose 7 to share its mysterious melody. Luna felt the town's growing symphony with new awareness. Margaret's rediscovered rhythm would soon add its voice to the invisible chorus that flowed through Millhaven's streets. Another thread in the tapestry of connection she was learning to weave. The responsibility felt both overwhelming and perfectly natural, like breathing or listening to the rain, something essential that required no conscious effort, only attention and love. Outside, Millhaven settled into evening with the contentment of a community that had learned to listen to its own heart, and Luna understood that her gift was not really about hearing hidden music at all, but about helping people remember that they had always been musicians in the symphony of their own lives. The weeks following Margaret's rediscovery of rhythm brought a transformation that rippled through Millhaven, like gentle waves across still water. Her Thursday evening visits had evolved into something more communal, with Elena arriving earlier to practice alongside Margaret's drumming, their combined melodies creating a foundation that seemed to invite others to join. Miss Harmony noticed how people began timing their evening walks to coincide with these impromptu sessions, pausing outside the shop's open windows to listen with the reverence usually reserved for prayer. Luna moved through these golden summer days with a growing awareness that something larger was taking shape around them. The town's invisible symphony had deepened, individual songs weaving together into harmonies that transcended their separate parts. She could hear it in the way Mr. Oakes hummed while adjusting his clocks, his rhythm unconsciously matching Silas's morning bread route 3 blocks away. She felt it in the synchronized breathing of children playing in the park, their laughter creating counterpoint melodies that seemed to echo Elena's flute practice from the night before. This deepening connection brought with it a natural desire for gathering, though no one spoke of it directly. Instead, Mrs. Harmony began sharing quiet stories of her childhood, when her parents would hang paper lanterns in the alley behind the shop and invite neighbors to bring whatever they could play. "We called it the Lantern Evening," she said one afternoon while polishing the brass metronome. "No stage, no audience, just a circle and the night listening with us." Luna felt the town's readiness for such a gathering, like a song waiting to be sung. The invitation extended itself naturally, Elena nodding with shy enthusiasm, Mr. Oakes offering to repair folding chairs, Margaret promising to bring poems that matched her drumbeats. Even Silas, who understood what people needed before they asked, appeared the morning of the chosen evening, with sandwiches wrapped in clean cloth, explaining simply that food listens too. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the alley filled slowly and deliberately, people arriving with the careful attention of those who recognized they were participating in something precious. Paper lanterns cast gentle pools of golden light, and the evening air carried the sweet scent of late summer flowers. They formed a circle without instruction, each person settling into their place with the natural ease of water finding its level. The music that emerged wasn't performance but conversation, tentative notes from Elena's flute answered by Margaret's steady drumbeat, Mr. Oak's pocket metronome providing gentle guidance, voices joining in wordless harmonies that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath their feet. Luna didn't lead so much as tend, offering soft accompaniment that supported without overwhelming, creating space for each voice to find its own confidence. When the silver music box chose to open at exactly 9:03, its tiny dancer spinning in the lantern light, the melody it offered seemed to gather all their separate songs into a single breathing whole. The circle listened with the reverence of people who had learned to recognize magic when it appeared, and Luna felt the profound satisfaction of watching a community remember how to sing together. It was during this gentle evening that Luna noticed a figure standing at the edge of the light, a woman who moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to working with delicate things. She introduced herself quietly as Claire, explaining that she ran the small art supply shop 2 streets over and had been drawn by the music floating through her evening inventory. Claire's inner song was complex and layered, built on foundations of patience and attention to detail, but carrying an undertone of creative longing that had been carefully contained for years. She watched the circle with the hungry attention of someone who had spent decades nurturing others' artistic dreams while quietly setting aside her own. When Elena offered her flute with gentle encouragement, Claire shook her head apologetically, but smiled with genuine warmth. Instead, she pulled a small sketchbook from her bag, her pencil moving across the paper with swift, confident strokes. What emerged wasn't a drawing of the gathering, but something more abstract, flowing lines that seemed to capture the music itself, the invisible connections between voices, the way melody moved through the circle, like light through water. Luna watched this quiet act of creation with wonder, understanding that Claire was translating their shared song into a different language, one written in curves and shadows rather than notes and rhythms. When she held up the finished sketch, the group fell silent, recognizing their evening transformed into something they could see as well as hear. As the lanterns were gently extinguished and people began their quiet departures, Luna helped Mrs. Harmony gather the music box from its place of honor. As she lifted it, her fingers found a small seam she had never noticed before, so fine it seemed more suggestion than actual line. With Mrs. Harmony's gentle encouragement, she carefully opened the hidden compartment, revealing a slip of paper thin as a petal. The note contained only 5 musical notes drawn in careful ink, with 3 words written in fading script: First Frost, Bridge. Mrs. Harmony's breath caught as she recognized her mother's handwriting, understanding that messages wait years to find their proper moment of discovery. They returned the note to its hiding place without discussion, both sensing that its meaning would unfold in its own time. Outside, Millhaven settled into sleep with the contentment of a community that had remembered something essential about itself. And Luna felt the gentle weight of responsibility and joy that came with helping others find their voices in the world's endless, beautiful song. The lingering warmth of the lantern evening settled over Millhaven like a cherished memory, its echoes woven into the fabric of summer's gentle retreat. Claire's sketch remained in the shop window, its flowing lines catching the attention of passers-by who sensed something profound in those abstract curves without quite understanding why. The hidden note with its mysterious message, 5 musical notes and the words First Frost, Bridge, had become a quiet presence in Luna's thoughts, patient as a seed waiting for the right season to bloom. Mrs. Harmony spoke often of the old stone bridge that spanned Millhaven's sleepy river, sharing memories of her mother's belief that bridges were the most musical of all structures. She used to say they held the space between 2 places, Miss Harmony explained one afternoon while polishing the silver music box. Like the pause between notes that gives meaning to melody, our bridge remembers every song that ever crossed it. As autumn painted the first leaves in shades of amber and rust, Luna felt the town's invisible symphony shifting, its individual melodies beginning to converge toward some central point she couldn't yet identify. The change was subtle, but unmistakable. Elena's flute practice seemed to harmonize with Margaret's drumming 3 blocks away, while Silas's unconscious humming matched the rhythm of Mr. Oakes adjusting his clocks across the street. It was during one of these crisp October afternoons that a new kind of silence entered the shop. It belonged to a young man who introduced himself quietly as Finn, explaining that he had recently arrived to work at Millhaven's small library. He moved with hesitant grace, his eyes scanning the instruments as if searching for something he wasn't sure existed. Luna perceived his inner music immediately, a beautiful melody trapped behind layers of unspoken grief, like sunlight struggling through heavy clouds. Finn lingered by the string instruments, his fingers hovering over a dusty mandolin with the reverence of someone approaching a sacred memory. When Luna asked gently about his interest in music, his voice carried the weight of loss carefully contained. "My grandfather taught me to play," he said softly. "But after he passed, the music felt too heavy, too much like remembering what I'd lost." Luna understood immediately. She had encountered this particular form of musical silence before, not absence, but presence made painful by association. Without offering solutions or quick comfort, she settled beside him with a small ukulele, beginning to strum a melody so gentle it felt less like music than like breathing made audible. The three-chord progression drifted between them, acknowledging the weight of memory without demanding its immediate release. Finn watched her fingers, then closed his eyes, his breathing gradually aligning with the gentle rhythm. It was a slow transformation, like ice beginning to thaw in spring sunlight. When Luna finally let the last note fade into the shop's welcoming quiet, something had shifted in the space between them. "It doesn't have to be heavy," Finn whispered, wonder creeping into his voice. "The memory, the music, it can just exist, like a gentle breeze carrying something precious." Luna smiled with the understanding that needed no explanation. "The wind carries all kinds of songs," she replied softly, "even the ones we think are lost." She offered him the ukulele, and though Finn didn't play, he held it with the careful attention of someone making a quiet promise to himself. Meanwhile, the established members of their musical community continued to flourish in ways that surprised even Luna. Claire had begun visiting during the golden hour before sunset, her artistic vision expanding beyond documentation to something approaching translation, capturing not just what they played, but the invisible connections that flowed between voices. Her sketches had evolved into visual symphonies, abstract representations of harmony that somehow made the intangible aspects of their gathering visible. Margaret arrived each Thursday with increasing confidence, her drum now accompanied by a small notebook of poems she was beginning to read aloud. Her words carried the same steady rhythm as her drumming, creating a bridge between spoken language and pure sound that enchanted their growing circle of listeners. Elena's flute had found new depths of expression, her melodies weaving through the shop's daily routines like golden thread through fabric. Even her practice sessions had become community events, drawing people to pause outside the open windows and listen with the reverence usually reserved for prayer. The silver music box seemed to respond to these deepening connections with its own mysterious awareness, choosing moments of particular significance to share its ancient melody. Its timing had grown more deliberate as autumn progressed, as if it too sensed the approaching threshold that the hidden note had promised. As the days grew shorter and the air carried the first hints of winter's approach, Luna found herself drawn to evening walks that invariably led toward the old stone bridge. She would stand at its center, listening with the deep attention that had become second nature, hearing layers of accumulated melody stored in its patient stones, decades of footsteps and conversations, laughter and tears, all woven into the bridge's enduring memory. On one particularly clear evening, when the sky held that crystalline quality that announces the season's turning, the music box opened at precisely 7:03. Its melody seemed different somehow, more urgent, more purposeful, as if the approaching first frost had awakened something that had been waiting patiently for its moment of revelation. Luna felt the town's collective song gathering momentum, all its separate threads drawing together toward the mysterious convergence that the hidden note had promised. The frost would come soon. She could taste it in the air, feel it in the way the evening light slanted through the shop windows with increasing urgency. As she helped Mrs. Harmony close the shop that night, Luna understood that they stood at the threshold of something significant. The bridge waited in the darkness beyond their windows, holding its ancient songs and preparing to receive whatever new melody the first frost would bring. The mystery would unfold in its own time, but Luna could feel its approach like distant thunder, promising transformation in the gentle language of seasons, turning and hearts opening to receive exactly what they needed most. The first frost arrived on a Tuesday morning like a whispered secret, painting Millhaven's windows with delicate crystalline lacework that caught the early light. Luna woke to the familiar chime of the music box at exactly 3 minutes past 6, but this time the melody carried something different, a clarity that seemed to cut through the morning silence with gentle purpose. She moved to the window and saw the world transformed, every surface wearing silver-like ceremonial dress prepared for an ancient ritual. Mrs. Harmony emerged from her room with the quiet excitement of someone who had been waiting decades for a mystery to finally reveal itself. Together they prepared the shop with unusual reverence, understanding without words that the moment foretold by the hidden note had arrived with the season's first crystalline breath. The frost had transformed familiar streets into something ethereal and expectant, each blade of grass wearing its coating of ice like jewelry prepared for celebration. By mid-morning their community had begun gathering without invitation or announcement, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had woven their lives together throughout the summer months. Elena arrived with her flute wrapped in familiar linen, her usual Thursday schedule seeming irrelevant in the face of whatever was calling them forward. Margaret appeared carrying her drum and notebook, followed by Mr. Oakes with a collection of small brass bells that chimed softly with each careful step. Finn arrived with the ukulele he had been learning to trust, his fingers still uncertain on its strings but his presence steady with quiet determination. Claire brought her sketchbook and a small set of watercolors, as if sensing that this day would require broader tools to capture whatever was about to unfold. Even Silas had closed his bakery early, appearing with warm bread and the patient smile of someone who understood that some moments were too precious for ordinary routines. As the morning progressed, Luna felt the town's collective song reaching towards something she could almost but not quite perceive. Without discussion or planning, their informal gathering began moving toward the old stone bridge, each person carrying their instrument or creative tool with the reverence of pilgrims approaching sacred ground. The bridge stood patient in the crystalline air, its ancient stones wearing frost like ceremonial robes. The river beneath moved with autumn's lazy contentment, reflecting pale sky in ripples that seemed to carry their own quiet. Luna approached the bridge's center with growing awareness that this moment had been orchestrated by forces far more subtle and wise than human planning could achieve. They arranged themselves in a gentle circle at the bridge's heart, without instruction, each finding their place with the natural ease of water finding its level. The silver music box, carried in Mrs. Harmony's bag like a small moon, began to play without being wound, its melody rising clear and true in the crisp air. But this time something extraordinary happened. The 5 musical notes from the hidden message began emerging from the box's familiar tune, weaving themselves into the melody like golden thread through patient fabric. Luna felt the town's invisible symphony gathering around them with breathtaking intensity. Every song they had shared throughout the summer seemed to converge at this moment, creating harmonies that transcended their individual voices. She hummed the 5 notes softly, and Elena's flute joined with instinctive perfection, followed by Margaret's gentle drumming and the soft chiming of Mr. Oakes's bells. Finn found his courage in that magical convergence, his ukulele adding its sweet voice to the growing chorus. Claire's watercolors moved across paper with swift confidence, capturing not just visual beauty, but something more elusive, the way music becomes visible when hearts open completely to its presence. Silas hummed deep bass notes that seemed to rise from the earth itself, while Mrs. Harmony's voice wove ancient lullabies into their shared melody. As their combined music rose into the frosty air, the bridge itself began to respond. Its ancient stones resonated with accumulated decades of songs and stories, footsteps and conversations, all the human music that had crossed its 8th span. The sound that emerged wasn't loud or dramatic, but profound, a deep harmonic that seemed to rise from memory itself. Luna understood then what the hidden note had been preparing them for. The bridge had always been musical, holding space between two places like the pause between notes that gives meaning to melody. But it needed a community of voices to awaken its full song, hearts willing to offer their individual melodies to something larger than themselves. The frost began catching light as their music continued, droplets creating tiny prisms that scattered rainbow fragments across the bridge's stones. Luna felt the profound satisfaction of watching mystery unfold exactly as intended, revealing not answers but deeper questions about connection and the patient way love builds itself through small acts of creative courage. As the last notes faded into crisp air, the silver music box closed with a gentle click. Its mysterious timing finally explained. They had been preparing all summer for this moment, not just to make music together, but to awaken something that had been waiting patiently for the right combination of voices, hearts, and seasonal magic. The bridge held their silence with the same reverence it had offered their song, and Luna knew this moment would become part of its accumulated memory, another layer in the endless symphony of human connection flowing across its stones. They had created something beautiful together, but more than that, they had discovered that the most profound music emerges not from individual talent, but from willingness to blend one's voice with others in service of something larger and more mysterious than any single heart could contain. As they began their quiet walk back toward town, Luna felt deep contentment that comes from participating in magic revealing itself slowly, through patience and attention, rather than dramatic gesture. The first frost had delivered its promise, and the bridge would remember their song long after the last traces of ice had melted into the river's gentle flow. The days following their gathering at the bridge settled into Millhaven like a gentle echo, each morning carrying traces of the frost song they had shared. Luna moved through the music shop with a deeper awareness of how profoundly their community had been changed by that crystalline morning. The bridge had given them something more than a shared experience. It had woven their individual melodies into a living tapestry that continued to grow stronger with each passing day. Mrs. Harmony spoke often of how the town felt different now, not in any way that could be measured or explained to outsiders, but in the subtle rhythms that governed daily life. People walked differently, their footsteps unconsciously keeping time with melodies they carried from the bridge. Conversations held new pauses, spaces that allowed for listening in ways that went beyond mere words. Even the morning light seemed to fall more gently through the shop windows, as if the frost had polished something essential in the very air around them. Elena's Thursday evening practice had evolved into something approaching ritual, her flute melodies now carrying harmonies that seemed to remember every voice that had joined them at the bridge. She arrived earlier each week, settling into the shop's familiar quiet with the contentment of someone who had found exactly where she belonged. Margaret brought her drum and notebook, but more than that, she brought the confidence of someone who had learned to trust her own creative voice. Silas continued his faithful bread deliveries, but his visits had deepened into something richer than commerce. He lingered by the window, humming melodies that wove together his grandmother's lullaby with the 5 frost notes they had discovered, creating something entirely new from the marriage of memory and present moment. Miss Stokes arrived each Tuesday with small brass tools, making minute adjustments to instruments with the reverence of someone tending sacred objects. Finn's transformation had been perhaps the most remarkable. The young librarian had begun hosting evening gatherings in the community room, where people shared not just music, but the stories that lived beneath their songs. His ukulele had become a bridge between hesitation and expression, its gentle voice encouraging others to risk their own tentative melodies. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that Luna noticed someone she had never seen before, an elderly woman standing perfectly still beside the garden fence across the street, her silver hair catching light like spun moonbeams. Luna felt her inner music immediately, a melody so rich and complex it took her breath away, yet shrouded in protective silence like a magnificent instrument kept under heavy cloth. The woman's name was Alara, Mrs. Harmony explained quietly. a long-time resident who had lived in gentle solitude since her husband's passing years before. "She tends the most beautiful garden in Millhaven," Harmony said with soft reverence. "But she hasn't spoken to anyone in so long that some folks have forgotten the sound of her voice." Luna watched Ilara through the shop window, sensing layers of accumulated melody stored within her careful stillness. This wasn't the chaotic silence of discord, but something more profound, a song so precious it had been wrapped in protective quiet, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The music Luna perceived wasn't absent, but patient, like seeds sleeping through winter, holding their potential close until spring. That evening, as they prepared to close the shop, the silver music box opened at exactly 3 minutes past 7, its familiar melody carrying something new, a gentle urgency that seemed to acknowledge Ilara's presence in their growing symphony. Luna felt the town's collective song reaching towards something she couldn't yet name, all their separate threads drawing together toward a convergence that would require infinite patience and the deepest kind of listening. Mrs. Harmony noticed Luna's thoughtful attention to their mysterious neighbor and smiled with understanding that needed no explanation. "Some songs," she said gently, polishing the music box's silver surface, "take years to find their courage, but they're worth waiting for." As they climbed the stairs to their apartment above the shop, Luna carried with her the image of Ilara's perfect stillness and the promise of melody that lived within it. Outside, Millhaven settled into evening with the contentment of a community that had learned to hold space for all kinds of music, joyful and sorrowful, confident and tentative, spoken and beautifully, powerfully silent. The responsibility of helping such a delicate song find its voice felt both overwhelming and perfectly natural, like breathing or listening to the rain. Luna understood that her gift was continuing to evolve, expanding from helping individuals rediscover their melodies to recognizing that sometimes the most profound music lived in the spaces between notes, in the patient silence that held infinite possibility. The night air carried the promise of deeper connections yet to unfold, and Luna drifted towards sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to tend the invisible garden of songs that flourished in the hearts of everyone who called Millen home. The weeks following their Frost Song gathering brought November's gentle embrace to Millhaven, and with it a deeper awareness of the quiet mystery that lived in Ilara's careful solitude. Luna found herself drawn to the shop's front window each morning, watching the elderly woman tend her garden, with movements so graceful they seemed choreographed to music only she could hear. Every gesture held purpose and reverence, from the way she deadheaded the last chrysanthemums to how she arranged fallen leaves in patterns that suggested melodies waiting to be discovered. Mrs. Harmony shared fragments of Ilara's history during their quiet afternoons, stories that emerged like pressed flowers from the pages of community memory. "She taught music at the elementary school for 30 years, Mrs. Harmony explained while polishing the silver music box with particular tenderness. "Had a gift for hearing potential in every voice, no matter how uncertain. Children who claimed they couldn't carry a tune would leave her classroom humming with confidence. Her voice carried the weight of deeper understanding. After her husband passed, he was our choir director. She wrapped herself in protective silence, keeping their shared music safe rather than risking it alone." Luna felt the profound significance of this revelation, understanding that Ilara's silence wasn't absence but preservation, a way of holding love so carefully that it remained untouched by time or loss. This wasn't about coaxing hidden songs into the open, but about honoring silence that served as its own form of devotion. The town's growing symphony continued its gentle evolution around this understanding. Elena's Thursday evening practice had become a beacon that drew people naturally toward the shop's open windows, while Margaret's poetry readings wove words and rhythm into something approaching prayer. Silas arrived each morning with bread and unconscious melodies, his grandmother's lullaby now harmonizing with the frost notes in ways that made Mrs. Harmony smile with quiet recognition. Mr. Oakes paused during his daily walks to observe Alara's garden with the reverent attention of someone recognizing masterful craftsmanship, while Finn had begun incorporating gentle musical interludes into his library story sessions. Luna understood intuitively that approaching such carefully preserved quiet would require a different kind of patience than anything she had yet learned. Rather than seeking direct contact, she began a subtle offering. Each morning before opening the shop, she would select a single bloom from Mrs. Harmony's window box, a late-blooming rose, a resilient marigold, and place it gently on the low stone wall that bordered Alara's garden. The ritual felt like breathing made visible, a wordless acknowledgement of beauty that asked for nothing in return. Luna would sometimes hum softly as she placed each flower, melodies that carried no expectation, only quiet appreciation for the symphony she sensed sleeping within Alara's careful movements. For several days the flowers simply disappeared by afternoon, silent acceptance that felt like conversation in a language beyond words. Luna continued her gentle practice, understanding that some invitations required infinite patience, that the most precious songs often took seasons to find their courage. Then, on a morning when frost painted the world in crystal and lace, Luna discovered something that made her heart catch with wonder. Tucked beneath her offering of purple asters, almost hidden by trailing ivy, lay a small river stone, polished smooth by countless seasons. Etched into its surface with remarkable delicacy was a single musical note, the first of the 5 frost notes that had begun their bridge symphony. Luna held the stone in her palm, feeling its cool weight like a promise kept. Alara had responded not with spoken words but with the language of creation itself, echoing the very essence of her garden's patient beauty. The stone was a counter-melody, a quiet affirmation that the invitation had been received and thoughtfully, tenderly acknowledged. That evening, as golden light slanted through the shop windows with autumn's particular urgency, the silver music box opened at exactly 3 minutes past 7. Its melody seemed to carry new harmonies, echoes that spoke of connections forming in the spaces between sound and silence, between offering and acceptance. Mrs. Harmony watched Luna cradle the etched stone and smiled with understanding that needed no explanation. "Some conversations," she said gently, "happen in languages we're still learning to speak, but the heart always knows when it's been heard." As they prepared to close the shop, Luna felt the deep satisfaction that came from witnessing patience rewarded with grace. Outside, Alara's garden rested under evening's soft blanket, its careful keeper moving through twilight routines with movements that seemed somehow lighter, as if the simple act of acknowledgement had shifted something essential in the quality of her solitude. The stone remained warm in Luna's pocket as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, a tangible reminder that the most profound connections often began not with grand gestures, but with small acts of recognition offered without expectation. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to tend this delicate correspondence, to nurture the invisible garden of understanding that was slowly, patiently beginning to bloom between them. Millhaven settled into sleep with the contentment of a community learning that healing happened not through force or urgency, but through the gentle persistence of love, offered freely, received gratefully, and returned in whatever form the heart found possible. The morning after discovering Alara's first stone brought December's gentle arrival to Millhaven, frost painting delicate patterns on windows that caught the early light like crystalline sheet music. Luna woke to find the world transformed into something approaching reverence, every surface wearing winter's ceremonial silver with the patience of seasons turning. The stone rested on her nightstand, its etched musical note seeming to hum with quiet promise in the pale morning light. Mrs. Harmony emerged from her room with the soft excitement of someone who had learned to recognize the approach of meaningful moments. Together they prepared the shop with unusual care, understanding that winter's first breath carried particular significance in their growing correspondence with Alara. The silver music box chimed at exactly 3 minutes past 6, its melody seeming to dance with the frost visible through their windows. Luna selected her morning offering with special attention, a single white chrysanthemum from their window box that had somehow survived the season's turning, its petals carrying the resilience of beauty that refused to surrender to winter's approach. She wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and stepped into the hushed world beyond their door, her footsteps creating soft impressions in frost that sparkled like scattered stars. Alara's garden wore winter like a meditation, each bare branch and dormant flowerbed arranged with the precision of someone who understood that rest was essential to renewal. Luna placed her chrysanthemum on the familiar stone wall, adding beside it the small river stone Alara had gifted her, returning it like a gentle echo in their wordless conversation. When she checked again an hour later, Luna discovered something that made her breath catch in wonder. Where her offerings had been, a small arrangement waited, not just her flower returned, but joined by a sprig of evergreen, 3 red berries arranged like musical notes, and another stone. This one bore the second of their 5 frost notes, etched with the same delicate precision, its surface somehow warm despite the cold morning air. The arrangement spoke in the language of seasons and endurance, acknowledging winter's beauty while promising spring's eventual return. Luna understood that Alara was sharing something profound, not just musical notes, but a philosophy of patience, a way of holding hope through the darkest months, by remembering that silence was not emptiness but preparation. As the day progressed, their community gathered naturally around this growing mystery. Elena arrived early, her flute wrapped against the cold, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had guided their summer's musical journey. Margaret appeared with her drum and a thermos of hot tea, followed by Mr. Oakes carrying small brass bells that chimed softly in the winter air. Finn brought his ukulele, and Claire arrived with watercolors that seemed particularly suited to capturing frost's ephemeral beauty. Even Silas closed his bakery early, appearing with warm bread and the patient understanding that some moments required witness. They gathered in the shop's welcoming warmth, not to make music, but to hold space for whatever was emerging in the delicate correspondence between Luna and their mysterious neighbor. Mrs. Harmony shared stories of Alara's legendary winter concerts, events that had once drawn families from neighboring towns. She had a way of helping every voice find its perfect place in the harmony. Mrs. Harmony explained, her words carrying the warmth of cherished memories. Even the quietest singers would discover confidence they never knew they possessed. As afternoon light began its early fade, Luna felt drawn to the window once more. Alara stood in her garden, perfectly still among the frost-covered beds, her silver hair catching the last rays of pale sunlight. But something was different. Her stillness held a quality of anticipation rather than protection, as if she too sensed that their patient correspondence was approaching some kind of threshold. The silver music box chose that moment to open, its melody rising clear and true in the shop's warm air. But this time, something extraordinary occurred. The 5 frost notes began emerging from the familiar tune with crystal clarity, as if the box itself had learned to sing their growing song. Luna felt the town's invisible symphony gathering around them, all their summer's music converging with winter's patient wisdom. Without conscious thought, Luna began humming the 2 notes softly, and Elena's flute joined with instinctive harmony. Margaret's drum provided gentle rhythm, while Mr. Oakes's bells added their crystalline voices to the growing chorus. Finn found courage for his ukulele, Claire's watercolors moved across paper with swift confidence, and Silas hummed bass notes that seemed to rise from the earth itself. As their music filled the shop's warm space, Luna noticed movement in Elara's garden. The elderly woman had begun walking slowly among her frost-covered beds, her movements keeping perfect time with their distant melody. She wasn't singing, not audibly, but her entire being seemed to resonate with the music flowing from the shop, creating an invisible bridge of harmony that spanned the space between them. When their song finally faded into winter's gentle quiet, Alara remained motionless for a long moment, then moved to her garden gate. She opened it just slightly and placed something on the post, a small bundle in brown paper, secured with string, the color of winter wheat. Then she returned to her path, closing the gate with the care of someone completing a sacred ritual. Luna waited until the afternoon light had softened to gold before approaching the gate. The bundle contained a collection of pressed leaves, each one perfect in its preservation, arranged between sheets of tissue paper, but more remarkable still, each leaf had been delicately marked with pencil, tiny dots and lines that corresponded to the remaining 3 frost notes, creating a musical score written in the language of seasons themselves. As evening settled over Millhaven with winter's early darkness, Luna understood that they had reached another threshold in their delicate correspondence. The leaves with their musical markings were more than gifts. They were invitations to remember that music lived not just in sound, but in the patient spaces between notes, in the silence that gave meaning to melody, in the careful tending of beauty through seasons of both flourishing and rest. The frost continued its delicate work as they prepared to close the shop, each crystal carrying the promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to nurture the invisible garden of connection that was slowly, patiently beginning to bloom between their small community and the gentle keeper of Millhaven's most beautiful silence. The pressed leaves with their delicate musical notations rested on the shop counter like ancient manuscripts, each pencil mark holding the patient wisdom of seasons turned and songs carefully preserved. Luna arranged them in sequence with reverent fingers, understanding that Alara had transformed winter's dormancy into a living score where silence itself became an instrument worthy of the deepest respect. The remaining 3 frost notes seemed to pulse with quiet life beneath their botanical preservation, completing the mysterious melody that had been building between them all year. Mrs. Harmony emerged from the back room, carrying her mother's old music stand, its brass fittings worn smooth by decades of faithful service. She would have understood immediately, Mrs. Harmony said softly, positioning the stand where morning light could illuminate the leaves. Mother always said the most beautiful music lived in the spaces between notes, where the heart had time to truly listen. As word of the completed leaf score spread through their small community, each member responded with the unique gifts they had discovered throughout their musical journey together. Mr. Oakes arrived first, his clockmaker's precision immediately immediate to the careful spacing of Alara's pencil marks. These aren't just notes, he observed with quiet wonder. They're measured silences, rests that require the same attention as sound itself. She's teaching us to count the quiet. Elena studied the leaves with the reverence of someone recognizing a master's work, her flute case resting unopened beside her. She began breathing the patterns before attempting to play them, understanding instinctively that this music demanded a different kind of courage, the willingness to let silence carry as much weight as melody. Margaret arrived with her drum and notebook, immediately beginning to sketch poems that honored the spaces between words, while Finn brought his ukulele and the growing confidence of someone who had learned to trust his own creative voice. Claire appeared with watercolors that seemed particularly suited to Winter's palette, explaining quietly that she wanted to paint the pauses to make visible the gentle architecture of rest that Alara had so carefully notated. Even Silas closed his bakery early, arriving with warm bread and the understanding that some moments required witness, that community itself was a form of music requiring patient tending. As afternoon light began its early winter fade, Luna felt drawn to the shop window. Alara stood in her frost-covered garden, but something had shifted in her posture. The protective stillness had transformed into something approaching anticipation, as if she too sensed that their delicate correspondence was approaching its natural culmination. In her hands, barely visible in the gathering dusk, Luna glimpsed something that made her breath catch with recognition, a small wooden flute, its surface worn smooth by years of loving use. The silver music box chose that moment to open, its melody rising clear and true in the shop's warm air. But this time, all 5 frost notes emerged from the familiar tune with perfect clarity, as if the box itself had learned to sing their complete song. Luna felt the town's invisible symphony gathering around them with gentle urgency, all their separate threads drawing together toward the convergence they had been building towards since that first crystalline morning. Without conscious thought, their community began moving toward the bridge, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had guided their summer's musical journey. They carried their instruments with quiet reverence, understanding that this evening would ask for something different from their usual gatherings, not performance but presence, not music making but music receiving. The old stone bridge wore winter-like ceremonial robes, its patient stones accepting their footsteps with the dignity of something that had witnessed countless seasons of human connection. They formed their familiar circle at its heart, but tonight the arrangement felt different, more spacious, as if making room for something precious that had been waiting years to join them. Elena lifted her flute but did not immediately play, instead breathing the rhythm of Alara's notated rests, letting silence establish its own authority. Margaret's hands hovered above her drum, honoring the counted quiet that Mr. Oakes had helped them recognize. Finn strummed a single gentle chord that faded into the winter air like visible prayer, while Claire's watercolors caught the last light reflecting off frost-covered stones. As their music began to take shape, not melody but measured breathing, not rhythm but patient waiting, Luna noticed movement at the bridge's far end. Alara approached with the careful grace they had watched from the shop window all these months, her wooden flute catching starlight like a small moon. She did not join their circle directly, but stood where the bridge's arc began, its gentle rise close enough to share their music, distant enough to honor the years of protective silence she had maintained. When Alara raised her flute to her lips, the first sounds were hesitant whispers, like someone remembering how to speak after a long journey through quiet country. But gradually, tentatively, her voice found its strength, weaving through their patient harmonies with the confidence of someone who had never truly forgotten how to sing, only how to trust that her song still mattered. The melody that emerged was unlike anything Luna had ever heard, not just the 5 frost notes, but something larger and more profound, a song that seemed to carry the accumulated wisdom of seasons, the patient beauty of gardens tended through cycles of growth and rest, the enduring power of love held carefully through loss and gradual, grateful remembering. Their music rose into the winter air like visible benediction, creating harmonies that transcended individual voices and became something approaching sacred. When the last notes finally faded into night's gentle embrace, the silence that followed wasn't empty but full of resonance and possibility, charged with the particular peace that comes after profound truth has been spoken in the only language capable of containing it. As they prepared to leave the bridge, Alara approached Mrs. Harmony with steps that carried decades of careful consideration. "Your mother taught me to count the quiet," she said, her voice soft but steady after so many years of chosen silence. "Thank you for helping me remember that some songs are worth the waiting." They parted without promises, only with the understanding that some connections transcend the need for regular contact to remain eternally true. As Luna walked back through the gently falling snow, she felt the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing patience rewarded with grace, silence honored with song, and community deepened through the gentle persistence of love, offered freely and received with infinite gratitude. The town settled into sleep, with winter's early darkness, and Luna understood that tomorrow would bring the gentle conclusion of their year-long symphony. But tonight belonged to the spaces they had learned to keep sacred, the counted quiet that made all music possible. The morning after their bridge gathering arrived with the hushed reverence of snow continuing to fall, each flake carrying the echo of Alara's flute into Millhaven's gentle awakening. Luna woke to the familiar chime of the music box at exactly 3 minutes past 6, but this time its melody seemed different. fuller somehow, as if it had learned new harmonies during the night. The world outside wore winter's ceremonial dress, and the shop felt transformed, charged with the lingering resonance of shared song and spoken truth. Mrs. Harmony moved through their morning routines with quiet contentment, her steps lighter than they had been in years. The pressed leaves with their musical notations remained on the counter, but they seemed different now, not artifacts waiting to be understood, but completed conversations resting in satisfied silence. Some circles, she said softly while preparing tea, complete themselves so gently you hardly notice until you're standing in the center of something beautiful. Their community began gathering naturally as the morning progressed, drawn not by appointment but by the same invisible thread that had woven their lives together throughout the year. Elena arrived first, her flute wrapped against the cold, but she didn't immediately unwrap it. Instead, she stood by the window watching Alara's garden, understanding that some music lived in the spaces between notes, in the patient quiet that gave meaning to melody. Margaret appeared with her drum and a small wrapped bundle, explaining quietly that she had written a poem about counting silence. Finn brought his ukulele and the growing confidence of someone who had learned to trust his own creative voice, while Mr. Oakes arrived carrying a small velvet pouch with the careful attention of someone bearing precious cargo. Claire came with watercolors still damp from morning painting, her latest work capturing not the bridge itself but the invisible connections that had flowed between them the night before. Silas closed his bakery early, appearing with warm bread and the patient understanding that some moments required witness. As he arranged fresh loaves on the counter, his unconscious humming wove together his grandmother's lullaby with the 5 frost notes and something new, a gentle melody that seemed to rise from contentment itself. From his velvet pouch Mr. Oakes drew a small silver key, its surface worn smooth by decades of patient waiting. "From my shop," he explained, placing it carefully beside the music box. "There's a door that opens to your alley. I've kept it locked for years, thinking some boundaries were meant to remain. But last night taught me that the most beautiful music happens when we learn to open what we've been protecting." Mrs. Harmony accepted the key with reverence, understanding immediately its significance. Together they walked to the shop's back wall, where a door Luna had never noticed waited behind years of careful concealment. The key turned with a sound that belonged to beginnings, and suddenly their space expanded, the alley beyond becoming part of their sanctuary rather than separate from it. As afternoon light began its early winter fade, Mrs. Harmony brought out a cloth-wrapped bundle from the highest shelf, untying it with fingers that remembered decades of similar reverence. Inside lay a leather notebook, softened by years and held together by a ribbon that seemed to know more than it revealed. "My mother's," she explained softly. "She kept notes on the shop the way some people keep notes on the weather, observations of kindness, records of small miracles." She placed the notebook in Luna's hands with the kind of trust that required no ceremony, only recognition. Luna opened it carefully, finding pages filled with careful script documenting moments of musical awakening, visitors who had found exactly what they needed, evenings when the music box had chimed and someone had stepped through their door at precisely the right moment. One entry, written in fading ink, caught Luna's attention. "The shop breathes with the town's rhythm. We are not separate from the community, but part of its living song. Whoever tends this place must remember, we don't own the music, we simply help it find its voice." As evening approached and golden light slanted through windows painted with frost, Mrs. Harmony spoke with the gentle authority of someone who had learned to trust her own wisdom. "You've taught us all to hear the music that was always there," she said, her voice carrying decades of accumulated understanding. "This place belongs to that listening now, and you understand it better than anyone ever could." The offer hung in the winter air like visible benediction, and Luna felt both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of gift being offered. She had arrived in Millhaven as a child who could hear hidden melodies, but she had grown into someone who could help others remember that they had always been musicians in the symphony of their own lives. The silver music box chose that moment to open at exactly 3 minutes past 7, its melody rising clear and true in the shop's warm air. But this time, all 5 frost notes emerged with perfect clarity, weaving themselves into the familiar tune like golden thread through patient fabric. Their entire year seemed present in that moment. Elena's growing confidence, Margaret's rediscovered rhythm, Silas's healing, Mr. Oakes's patient resilience, Finn's courage, Claire's visual translations of invisible music, and Alara's profound lesson about honoring the spaces between notes. As they prepared to close the shop, Luna felt the deep satisfaction that comes from witnessing patience rewarded with grace. Outside, Millhaven settled into sleep under its blanket of snow, and throughout the town people drifted off to dreams filled with melodies they were only beginning to remember how to sing together. The responsibility of tending such a place felt both overwhelming and perfectly natural, like breathing or listening to the rain, something essential that required no conscious effort, only attention and the kind of love that recognizes music in everything if one only learns to listen with the patience of seasons turning and hearts opening to receive exactly what they need most. Snow continued falling through the night, each flake carrying the promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to tend the invisible garden of songs that flourished in the hearts of everyone who called this place home. The morning after Mrs. Harmony's gentle offering arrived with winter's deepest hush, snow continuing to fall in patterns that seemed choreographed to melodies only the heart could hear. Luna woke to the familiar chime of the silver music box at exactly 3 minutes past 6, but this time its song carried something different, a sense of completion, beginning like the final movement of a symphony that had been building toward this moment all year long. She found Mrs. Harmony, already awake, sitting by the window with her mother's leather notebook open in her lap, reading entries by the pale light that filtered through frost-painted glass. "Some decisions," Miss Harmony said softly without looking up, "make themselves so quietly, you hardly notice until you're standing in the center of something beautiful." Luna understood that her acceptance had already happened somewhere deeper than conscious thought, woven into her dreams like golden thread through patient fabric. The silver key from Mr. Oak's shop rested on the counter beside the pressed leaves with their delicate musical notations, and together they walked to the back wall where the hidden door waited behind years of careful concealment. When Luna turned the key, it opened with a sound that belonged to beginnings, revealing the narrow alley beyond like a secret finally ready to be shared. Suddenly their space expanded, the winter air flowing in to mingle with the shop's warm atmosphere, inside and outside becoming part of the same gentle song. Mrs. Harmony moved through the morning with the quiet contentment of someone who had learned to trust the mysterious timing of important moments. She began sharing stories that felt like gentle instruction, each memory containing lessons about the delicate art of helping others find their voices. "The shop teaches you to listen," she explained while polishing the brass metronome with reverent attention. "Not just to the music people carry, but to the silence they protect. Sometimes the most beautiful songs live in the spaces we're afraid to disturb." Their community began gathering naturally as word of the opened door spread through Millhaven's invisible network of connection. Elena arrived first, her flute rapped against the cold, but she paused in the doorway with the reverence of someone recognizing sacred ground. Margaret appeared with her drum and a small bundle of winter poems, followed by Mr. Oakes carrying brass fittings and the satisfied expression of someone whose precision had served something larger than clockwork. Finn brought his ukulele and a young boy named Thomas, whose wide eyes took in every detail with the hungry attention of someone discovering that magic existed in ordinary places. Claire arrived with watercolors still damp from morning painting, her latest work capturing not the bridge itself, but the invisible connections that had flowed between them during their Frost Song gathering. Even Silas closed his bakery early, appearing with warm bread wrapped in clean cloth and the patient understanding that some moments required witness. As he arranged fresh loaves on the counter, his unconscious humming wove together his grandmother's lullaby with the 5 frost notes and something entirely new, compositions that seemed to rise from the simple joy of belonging somewhere that understood the music he carried. Luna felt the town's invisible symphony shifting around this new configuration, individual melodies beginning to harmonize with the expanded space in ways that created deeper possibilities for connection. She knelt beside young Thomas, who was testing the floorboards with curious fingers. "Sometimes the song gets brave enough to say hello," she whispered, and they waited together until his eyes widened with private wonder. "I hear it," he breathed, needing no more explanation. As afternoon light began its early winter fade, Mrs. Harmony brought out a small wooden sign she had been crafting in secret. Door of listening carved in elegant script that seemed to invite rather than announce. Together they hung it beside the threshold, understanding that some boundaries were meant to be dissolved through patient attention rather than dramatic gesture. The silver music box chose that moment to open at exactly 3 minutes past 4, its melody rising clear and true in the expanded space. All 5 frost notes emerged with perfect clarity, weaving themselves through the familiar tune like recognition finally given voice. Luna felt the profound satisfaction of watching mystery unfold exactly as intended, revealing not answers but deeper questions about connection and the patient way love builds itself through small acts of creative courage. When Alara appeared at the mouth of the alley, carrying her wooden flute and wearing winter-like ceremonial robes, Luna understood that their year-long symphony was approaching its natural conclusion. The elderly woman didn't cross the threshold, but stood where snow met warmth, adding her voice to their gathering with the confidence of someone who had learned to trust that her songs still mattered. As evening settled over Millhaven with winter's early darkness, Luna felt both the weight of responsibility and the lightness of gift being offered. She had arrived as a child who could hear hidden melodies, but she had grown into someone who could help others remember that they had always been musicians in the symphony of their own lives. Mrs. Harmony placed the leather notebook in Luna's hands with the kind of trust that required no ceremony, only recognition. "You understand this place better than anyone ever could," she said simply. "It belongs to that listening now." The fountain pen felt familiar in Luna's fingers as she wrote her first entry. "Today the door learned our song. We opened it by listening." Outside, snow continued its patient work, each flake carrying the promise that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to tend the invisible garden of connection that flourished in the space between silence and song, between memory and hope, between what had been lost and what could still be found through the simple act of listening with infinite love. The night air carried the deep contentment of a community that had learned to hold space for all kinds of music, and Luna drifted towards sleep, knowing that she had found her true calling in helping others remember the melodies that lived within their hearts, waiting patiently to be heard, honored, and shared with the world. The weeks following Luna's acceptance of the leather notebook settled into Millhaven like a gentle song, finding its natural rhythm. Snow continued to drift through the open doorway, each flake dissolving into the shop's warm air as if crossing a threshold from dream to waking. Luna moved through her new responsibilities with growing confidence, understanding that tending such a place required not just attention to instruments and melodies, but to the invisible connections that made community possible. Mrs. Harmony spent her mornings teaching Luna the subtle arts of keeping their sanctuary alive, how to recognize when someone needed silence more than sound, when to offer instruments and when to simply provide space for whatever wanted to emerge naturally. "The shop has its own rhythm," she explained while showing Luna how to wind the music boxes with just the right tension. "Learn to breathe with it and it will teach you everything you need to know." Their community continued to flourish around the open door, each member finding deeper expression of their rediscovered voices. Elena's Thursday evening practice had evolved into something approaching ritual, her flute melodies drawing people naturally toward the warm light spilling from their windows. Margaret arrived with her drum and increasingly confident poetry, her words now carrying rhythms that seemed to rise from the shop's own patient breathing. Silas had begun a new tradition he called the noon warmth, arriving each day with sandwiches wrapped in clean cloth and tea that steamed like small invisible songs. People came in from the cold, and the simple meal threaded them together without ceremony, the way warm bread has always suggested that staying is better than rushing. Luna noticed how food could become a lullaby when offered with genuine kindness, how even the clink of spoons became part of their ongoing symphony. Mr. Oakes continued his precise adjustments to instruments and the new doorway chime, understanding that time itself could be tuned to serve harmony rather than urgency. Finn brought young Thomas each afternoon, the boy's eager questions and careful attention reminding Luna of her own first days in the shop. Even Claire had expanded her role, her watercolors now documenting not just their gatherings, but the invisible connections that flowed between voices like golden thread through patient fabric. Ilara appeared in the alley one crystalline evening carrying a small packet wrapped in brown paper. Inside lay seeds labeled in delicate script: parsley, violet, patience, with 3 musical rests drawn along the bottom edge like tiny boats on quiet water. She placed the packet on the threshold without crossing it, offering a bow that was also a thank you before returning to her frost-covered garden. The gesture spoke of continuity, of seasons turning and beauty planted for future springs. As Luna wrote her daily observations in the leather notebook, she began to understand the profound responsibility of holding space for others' musical awakening. It wasn't about maintaining instruments or organizing sheet music, but about creating an atmosphere where the town's invisible symphony could deepen and grow. She documented moments of connection, the subtle ways kindness rippled through their small world, the patient magic of helping others remember songs they had carried all along. One evening, as golden light slanted through frost-painted windows, Mrs. Harmony approached with a small silver key that seemed to hum with its own quiet music. "My mother left this for whoever would tend and shop after me," she explained softly. "She said it would know its purpose when the time came." The key felt warm in Luna's palm, its surface engraved with tiny musical notes that spiraled like a song made visible. That night, the silver music box opened at exactly 3 minutes past 7, but this time all 5 frost notes emerged with crystalline clarity, weaving themselves through the familiar melody, while the engraved key began to resonate softly. Luna felt drawn to a small wooden cabinet in the shop's far corner, one that had remained unopened for as long as she could remember. The key fit perfectly, revealing compositions unlike anything she had ever seen. Music written, not in traditional notation, but in symbols that captured the essence of human connection itself. Curves that suggested laughter, spirals that held the shape of tears, interconnected lines that mapped the invisible threads between hearts. She called it the Symphony of Belonging, Mrs. Harmony whispered, recognizing her mother's most precious creation. Music written not for instruments but for communities, melodies that could only be played by people who had learned to listen to each other's hearts. Luna understood then that this was her true inheritance, not just a shop or the ability to hear hidden melodies, but the responsibility of helping others remember that the most profound music emerged from willingness to blend one's voice with others in service of something larger than any single heart could contain. As winter deepened around them, their community gathered naturally each evening, drawn by the warm light and the promise of connection. They formed their familiar circle without instruction, voices joining in harmonies that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath their feet. No one led, everyone listened. The music they created wasn't performance but conversation, a living testament to the patient work of learning to hear each other truly. Outside, Millhaven settled into sleep under its blanket of snow, and throughout the town, People drifted off to dreams filled with melodies they were only beginning to remember how to sing together. The silver key remained warm in Luna's pocket as they prepared to close the shop, a tangible reminder that some gifts took years to reveal their true purpose. Luna turned to a fresh page in the leather notebook and wrote her final entry of the evening. "We are practicing how to leave the door open. We are learning that endings are just rooms with windows." She placed the notebook on the music stand where morning light would find it, understanding that each day would begin where the night had left off. The lamp with its golden seams pulled forgiving light across counter and wood. The doorway chime breathed once more. Somewhere in the alley, snow settled with the sound of whispered blessings. Luna touched the threshold the way Alara had, thanking it for being both gate and instrument, both beginning and endless song. And with that gentle recognition, she stretched into dreams that carried the promise of endless connections yet to be made, endless opportunities to help the world remember that it had always been singing, if only someone would take the time to listen with infinite love